Hey, this is Buck Dharma of Blue Oyster Cult, and you're listening to the Sports Circus.
Welcome to the Sports Circus. I'm your ringmaster Sal, live from Las Vegas in the AMP-TV studio, AAMP Television. Today's show is brought to you by UppercutChops.com. Check out their tasty selection of all-natural, dry-aged USDA Prime Wagyu and Prime Angus steaks and chops. Wait till you taste their best-in-class New York steaks, the filet mignon, and of course the king of all, those cowboy cut and tomahawk cut ribeyes. Best I've ever had, probably be the best you ever have as well from UppercutChops.com. Tell you what, find out what's for dinner, give them a call, 714-948-0100, 714-948-0100, 714-948-0100 for UppercutChops.com. All right, welcome in everybody listening in on all of our affiliates, CBS, NBC, Fox, Independence from coast to coast, everybody on television as well, Cox, Comcast, Spectrum, Frontier, Oceanic, Time Warner, Spectrum, Wild Cable Television, and affiliates that are independent as well, plus everybody on Hotel TV and on social media platforms, plus Facebook, everybody on Chicago Food Favorites. Thanks for joining us as well. How about a little history lesson today with the National Football League? A lot of people have heard of the AFL and the NFL and this merger and this, that, and the other. Well, they don't really know what it was. They don't know the teams. They don't really know much because it was way back in yesteryear. Well, I'm here to tell you a little bit about that today and how it affects things moving forward, even in today's time. So way back in the time machine, the AFL-NFL merger was the merger of the two major professional American football leagues, of course, right here in the U.S. At the time, the National Football League, and of course, the American Football League. Now, it paved the way for a combined league, which retained the National Football League name and logo, of course, everybody knows that, to become the most popular sports league in this country. And the merger was announced on the evening of June 8th of 1966. Under the merger agreement, the leagues maintained separate regular season schedules for the next 4 seasons, from 1966 to 1969, with a final championship game, which would become known as the Super Bowl, and then officially merged before the 1970 season to form one league with 2 conferences. That's why we have the AFC and the NFC, right? So we have the National Football League and the American Football League. That's where this comes from, folks. How about a little background on it? Now, going way back to 1920, the NFL, in its inception, fended off several rival leagues. Before 1960, its most important rival was what? It was the All-America Football Conference. The All-America Football Conference, in case you didn't know. We'll just call that the AAFC, which began play in 1946. Now, the AAFC differed from the NFL in several ways, despite relatively strong backing at the league's inception. It ultimately proved an unsustainable venture. Now, the AAFC's most serious weakness resulted from its refusal to implement an initial draft, and this caused a massive lack of competition and competitive balance, and resulted in the league's strongest team being the Cleveland Browns back in the day, dominating the league and becoming perennial champions. Now, due to the AAFC's poor financial situation as well, the league disbanded after the 1949 season. Now, 3 AAFC teams, the Cleveland Browns, San Francisco 49ers, and the original version of the Baltimore Colts, which are now the Baltimore Ravens, right? Because they went from the Baltimore Colts to, where the hell did they go? From the Colts to, I don't know. Anyway, the point being, Baltimore Colts ended up being the Baltimore Ravens, and then the old Cleveland Browns Actually, the old Cleveland Browns became the Ravens. That's what it was. And so the Baltimore Colts became the Indianapolis Colts. So now when those three teams play, it's just, wow. You've got multiple cities involved here. But more importantly, you've got to look at this and saying, okay, the Baltimore Colts, who are they? Well, they are now the Indianapolis Colts. Sorry, I'm a little confused on this myself, just in reading and thinking about this. So anyway, the Cleveland Browns, the old version, became who? They became the Baltimore Ravens. So just the whole thing is really weird. Anyway, so the original version of the Baltimore Colts were absorbed into the NFL in 1950. And the league was briefly known as the National American Football League during the offseason, but reverted to the traditional name of National Football League by the time the 1950 season began, and the Browns went back on to shock the National Football League loyalists by dominating the older league and winning the championship in their first season, thus providing and proving themselves to be among the best professional football teams of that time. So you also had the emergence of the AFL in 1950. Think about that. So after the NFL absorbed the AAFC, it was the AFL that came to the table, and it had no other rival U.S. leagues throughout the 1950s. The only other professional gridiron football league then in operation were the Canadian leagues that would merge to form the present-day Canadian Football League in 1958. Now, in 1959, Lamar Hunt, son of Texas oil magnate H.L. Hunt, attempted to either gain the ownership of the Chicago Cardinals. Now, in case you don't know about the Chicago Cardinals, they were originally the Chicago Stags, and they played at Comiskey Park, where the White Sox used to play before they blew that stadium up and then built their other stadium, which was built around 1989, 1990, whatever the heck it was. But the Cardinals were renamed from the Stags. So the Stags were named as Chicago Cardinals. And then, well, that's largely because the state bird of Illinois is a cardinal. And so now you had two teams that played football in Chicago, one being the Chicago Cardinals, and they played at Comiskey Park where the White Sox played, and they had the Chicago Bears that played at Wrigley Field where the Cubs played. And then eventually what happened was the Chicago Cardinals moved down to St. Louis to become the St. Louis Cardinals. Again, state bird, a cardinal. Makes sense. And after time, it was the St. Louis Cardinals moving to Phoenix to become the Phoenix Cardinals. Why did they keep the name? Because, again, the state bird for the state of Arizona happens to be a cardinal, which eventually over time they wanted the Phoenix Cardinals to represent the entire state of Arizona, so they changed the name to the current Arizona Cardinals, in case you didn't know. All right, so nonetheless, back to H.L. Hunt and his attempt to either gain ownership of the Chicago Cardinals with Bud Adams and move them to Dallas or own an NFL expansion franchise in Dallas. So that happened in 1959. Now, the league, however, was not interested in expansion at the time, so rebuffed in his attempts to gain at least part ownership in an NFL team. Hunt conceived the idea of a rival professional football league, the American Football League, right? There's your AFL, folks. So in September of 1959, Hunt was approached by the NFL about expansion teams into Dallas, but by then Hunt was interested in only the AFL. So the NFL came a little bit too late on that one. Now, the new league had 6 different franchises by August of 1959, and 8 by the time of its first opening day in 1960. And those teams were the Boston Patriots, currently known as the New England Patriots, the Buffalo Bills, the Titans of New York, the Houston Oilers, which are now the Tennessee Titans, the Denver Broncos, the Dallas Texans, who are the Dallas Cowboys, the Oakland Raiders, and the Los Angeles Chargers, the Superchargers. While the Los Angeles, New York, Oakland, and Dallas teams shared media markets with NFL teams, the Rams, Giants, 49ers, and expansion Dallas Cowboys, respectively, other 4 teams, Boston, Buffalo, Denver, and Houston, widened the nation's exposure to professional football by serving markets that had no NFL team. That's pretty interesting stuff here. Now, in the following years, this additional exposure was widened via the relocation of two of the original 8 teams, the Chargers to San Diego in 1961, and the Texans, where'd they go? To Kansas City in 1963. And the addition of 2 expansion franchises, the Miami Dolphins and the Cincinnati Bengals. Interesting stuff, folks. Now, from small colleges and predominantly black colleges, a source mainly ignored by the NFL, the AFL signed stars such as Albert Bluffton, Lionel Taylor from New Mexico Highlands, Tom Seastack from McNeese State, Charlie Tolar, and Charlie Hennigan from Northwestern State of Louisiana, Abner Hayes from North Texas State, and a host of others from major colleges has signed talented players like LSU's Heisman Trophy winner Billy Cannon, Arkansas's Lance Allworth, Notre Dame's Darryl LaMonica, Kansas's John Hadel, Alabama's Joe Namath, Broadway Joe, and many more. So the AFL also signed players the NFL had given up on, so-called NFL rejects, who turned out to be superstars that the NFL had misevaluated, such as Jack Kemp, Babe Parilli, George Blanda, Rod McDowell, Art Powell, John Tracy, Don Maynard, and the great Len Dawson. Tell you what, folks, when we come back from break, we're going to pick up with this discussion on the AFL, eventually merging in with the NFL in just a few minutes right here on the Sports Circus. Lots more to come, folks. You don't want to miss this one. Great history lesson on professional football. Don't go anywhere.
Attention business owners, you and your customers are listening to this right now. Face it, every business needs customers, even yours. The Sports Circus is a primetime nationally syndicated program that's carried on ABC, NBC, CNBC, and Westwood One News affiliates, plus CBS, Fox, and NBC Sports affiliates across North America, with coverage from Hawaii to New York. Also, the Sports Circus is available to the 180 million subscribers on iHeartRadio, and the Sports Circus gets about 4 million website visitors per month, which could click through your website and bring sales. The Sports Circus provides great content featuring celebrity guests from sports and entertainment to our audience every weekday, which your company could greatly benefit from by increasing your visibility, foot traffic, eyeballs to your website, and calls from potential customers. Call us right now at
714-948-0100. Again, 714-948-0100.
Or email us at info@thesportscircus.com. That's info@thesportscircus.com. Drive your sales today by advertising with the Sports Circus.
Could you use a little extra money right now? If you'd like to borrow up to $100,000 and get pre-approved in minutes, call the number we'll give you at the end of this commercial. Our lending partners have already loaned millions of dollars to individuals just like you, and we're ready to lend you up to $100,000 if you qualify. Even if your credit is not perfect, you could use the money to pay off high-interest credit cards, for home renovations, or consolidate existing debt. You can get flexible, easy-to-pay terms. The consultation to find out if you qualify is free. To find out if you qualify for our special financing program, call this toll-free number 24 hours a day. 800-335-1376. 800-335-1376. 800-335-1376. That's 800-335-1376. Important terms and conditions apply. Not all applicants will qualify. Loan amount, annual percentage rate, and term will vary depending on creditworthiness. Applying does not guarantee approval. Account approval is subject to verification and confirmation of your credit history and acceptance by a lender. If you choose to apply for a loan through us, a consumer report will be obtained to evaluate your creditworthiness in connection with your application for credit.
That's the sound of sizzling, dry-aged USDA Prime Wagyu and Angus steaks from UpperCutChops.com. Their best-in-class filet mignons, New York steaks, and the king of all steaks, the tomahawk and cowboy cut ribeyes, are the best in the business. Even their Prime Wagyu burgers will likely be the best you've ever had. Browse the full selection of steaks and chops at UpperCutChops.com from the comfort of your home or on your mobile device. UpperCutChops.com delivers all-natural, dry-aged USDA Prime Wagyu and Angus steaks and chops directly to your door. store without the hassle of going to the grocery store and fight crowds to pick from a small selection of average at best meats with injected steroids, fillers, and coloring added to look good. Find out what's for dinner at uppercutchops.com or call
714-948-0100, 714-948-0100, again, 714-948-0100.
or make your selection directly at uppercutchops.com.
Welcome back to the Sports Circus. I'm Roy Firestone. Now it's time to throw it back to Sal.
Thank you, Roy, and welcome back to the Sports Circus. I'm your ringmaster Sal, live from Las Vegas in the AMP TV studio, AAMP Television. This segment brought to you in part by our friends over at the College of Southern Nevada Athletics. Check them out at csncoyotes.com for upcoming games and events. That's csncoyotes.com for the College of Southern Nevada Athletics. Check them out, folks. And welcome back to everybody listening in on our network affiliates and independents, including our friends over in Atlanta, WDJY. Thanks for waking up with us. 99.1 FM over in Auburn, Alabama, ranging from Columbus, Georgia, over to Montgomery, based out of Auburn, is WAUD, home of the Atlanta Braves, 1230 on the AM dial. Big hello to our friends up and down the Midwest, all the way to the West Coast, all the way out to Honolulu, to CBS Sports 1500 KHKA. That's home of the New York Yankees, San Francisco 49ers, and the Alabama Crimson Tide. Plus, welcome in everybody at Cox, Comcast, Spectrum, Frontier, Oceanic, Time Warner, Spectrum, Wild Cable Television, and affiliates from coast to coast in select markets, Hotel TV, everybody on Apple, Amazon, Audible, Spotify, Pandora, YouTube, iHeart, Stitcher, Deezer, and all those other streaming platforms. Thanks for joining us. Plus, on Chicago Food Favorites, make sure you check out Chicago Food Favorites on Facebook, a fun group to post your favorite restaurants, recipes, and the favorite foods you like. And this, that, and the other. Have some fun. It's free, and I'm your administrator, so make sure you don't spam the page, if you know what I mean. All right. Back to the AFL and NFL discussion. Now, in the last segment, talked a little bit about how the AFL came about and the teams in which they brought. I'll just give you a quick recap. The new league, being the American Football League, had 6 franchises by August of 1959 and 8 by the time first opening day in 1960. And so, as a matter of fact, those teams were the Boston Patriots, the Buffalo Bills, the Titans of New York, the Houston Oilers, Denver Broncos, Dallas Texans, Oakland Raiders, and Los Angeles Chargers. Now, those teams, while LA, New York, Oakland, Dallas all shared media markets, the Rams, Giants, 49ers, and expansion Cowboys, other 4 teams, Boston, Buffalo, Denver, and Houston, widened the nation's exposure to professional football by serving markets that basically were not served. They were underserved, and yes, I can tell you that they were certainly underserved. So as we look at it, we say, all right, well, they filled a nice hole in the marketplace, which that's what good business people do. And so in the following years, additional expansion and exposure was basically to the Chargers from LA going to San Diego, and the Texans, the Dallas Texans, going to the Kansas City, become the Chiefs. And there was a couple of more teams that were put together that I mentioned in the last segment. That was the Miami Dolphins and the Cincinnati Bengals. And a lot of those players were drafted, and of course they came out of the HBCUs, and some were NFL rejects, alleged rejects, that is. Now, the AFL introduced many policies and rules to professional football, which the NFL later adopted, including a 14-game regular season. That's right, versus the 12-game. And, of course, that was exactly after 1 year's, the inaugural season, that the NFL increased from 12 games to 14. Now, the players' last names were also on the back of the jersey. How do you like that? We didn't have that before. It was just a number. And so, honestly, it was a good situation, I think, for the players, so they can be called out, identified when it came to the play-by-play announcers. And also for the referees, maybe number so-and-so and this particular individual, whatever. Not really sure how they did it back in the day. It's before my time. Nonetheless, a slightly narrower and longer ball, the Spalding J5V, which was easier to throw than the NFL's ball, the Duke from Wilson. So that was adopted also. How do you like that? The introduction of the two-point conversion to pro football, conforming to college football rules, adopted in 1958 college rules back in that season. Interesting. Official time on the scoreboard on the clock as opposed to it being kept by on-the-field officials. And, of course, one network television broadcast package for league games with first ABC from 1960 to 1964, then NBC beyond. Of course, sharing of the gate and television revenues by home and visiting teams. So it looked like the AFL was a lot more innovative, and they were a little bit more progressive in the way that they were doing things, a little bit more player-friendly, team-friendly, audience-friendly, and who knows, maybe a little bit more fair. I'd be very interested to see the original charter for the American Football League, because the National Football League's charter says they're what? An entertainment company.
Show me the money!
And there have been a lot of question marks about blown calls and convenient calls and referees swallowing whistles and all kinds of things with NFL football games. But that's another discussion for another time. But now the competition between the two leagues was another discussion. At first, the NFL ignored the AFL and its 8 teams, assuming the AFL would consist of players who could not earn a contract in the NFL in the first place. And the NFL also had the media advantage. For example, in the 1960s, Sports Illustrated's lead football writer was Tex Mall, who previously worked with NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle when Rozelle was the general manager of the LA Rams, and Mall was the team's public relations director. And Mall was, quote, was certainly an NFL loyalist, close quote. And several sports reporters took his perspective and his columns and his opinions on the AFL as fact. Interesting. Another example was Dallas Cowboys general manager Tex Schramm. A close friend of Pete Rozelle's, Schramm hired Rozelle, as a matter of fact, as the Rams general manager, who was influential in the NFL coverage by its national TV partner, CBS, including the network's employment of what? Of former NFL players as game announcers, and the absence of AFL score and reports on the network. Now, the AFL enjoyed one critical advantage over its established rival, which was that its owners on average were wealthier than their NFL counterparts. So with a few exceptions, Hunt had successfully recruited owners who not only had deep pockets, but more importantly, the patience and willingness to absorb the inevitable franchise and financial losses of the league's early years. Therefore, in spite of bad press, and unlike the NFL's previous rival, the AFL was able to survive and grow and began to prosper in the mid-1960s after the relocation of the Chargers and the Texans to non-NFL markets, to San Diego and to Kansas City, and the sale of the rebranding of the Titans being from New York to the New York Jets, and the Jets signing University of Alabama quarterback Broadway Joe Namath, and to an unprecedented $427,000 contract. Back in the day, folks, that was mad money. And the league's financial survival was further buoyed by NBC's $36 million 5-year contract to televise AFL games beginning in 1965. Now think about that, $36 million, what that's worth today. What's $36 million worth back in 1965? I don't know, go to your consumer price index calculator, inflation calculator. I'm sure the number is going to be substantial. So as the commercial rivalry between the leagues intensified, both leagues entered into a bidding war over the top college prospects, paying unprecedented amounts of money for the best players coming out of college. And the bidding wars escalated in the mid-1960s with the respective drafts held on the same day in the late fall. So by contract, many of the NFL owners had comparatively little wealth outside the value of their respective franchises, and the NFL consistently outdrew the AFL at the gate, especially in the AFL's first few seasons, thus ensuring that the older league's franchises remaining considerably more lucrative enterprises compared to their AFL rivals. But NFL owners knew they did not have unlimited resources to wage a real bidding war against the AFL. And so we think of those players being paid out of college from the AFL. The first thing that comes to my mind is John Wooden, the old coach of the UCLA Bruins basketball team from the 60s and 70s, won all those titles and whatnot. What's interesting is two players that played for him that I know, these are two players that I know personally, they told me very, very clearly, in fact, it may have even been on this show, they told me that John Wooden paid players as well. Now that in itself is very interesting. It's interesting because as I listen to the argument of what people say, well, you know, there's this name, image, and likeness thing, and players get paid and this, that, and the other. Now, back in the day, John Wooden, as I understood it, was paying the players. And so people say, well, you know, maybe they're paying too much money from the AFL and they have deep pockets and we're going to go ahead and we're going to drown the NFL. Well, listen, folks, there's a lot more to this argument than you may think. So as we look at the AFL paying more money than the NFL, first of all, they probably had to because it was a newer league. And then on top of it, they probably said, you know what, we're going to draw a little bit more and we're going to gain some market space and we're going to go ahead and do this. Well, we're going to build our franchises. We're going to build loyalty from our players and our audiences are going to like it because we're spending more money and eventually they're going to get more value and everyone's going to be happier in the long run. And that's actually what happened here. We're going to be back with this discussion here on the Sports Circus with the AFL and the NFL in just a few moments, folks. Don't go anywhere. I'm your ringmaster Sal of the Sports Circus, a primetime, nationally syndicated television, radio, sports, and entertainment show. The Sports Circus covers topics others are too scared to talk about. There's no other primetime show like it on here that'll punch you in the face and you'll beg for more. Join me, Hall of Famers, world champions, and all-star celebrity guests for chaos and controversy here on Libsyn and all podcast platforms, plus thesportscircus.com. Remember, folks, it's a circus and we prove it every day.
Hello Americans, it's Uncle Sam here. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes to the IRS or state, don't worry. I've got important news that may help you negotiate a lower tax bill. In today's economy, the IRS has released a variety of new rules and is offering more flexible terms to help Americans looking to settle their IRS debt. If you apply today, we may be able to lift your wage garnishments and release a freeze on your bank assets or business. Our team of tax professionals can resolve your case and stop collection actions against you. Even if you've been audited or haven't filed a return in years, they can help. Call right now and find out if you qualify to settle your IRS debt for far less than what you owe. Pick up your phone right now and call us for a free $500 IRS tax review. Don't wait. Here's the number.
Call right now. 800-950-2049. 800-950-2049. 800-950-2049. For the last time, that's 800-950-2049.
Do a search on how to get out of credit card debt, and you'll find everything from crazy promises to ways you can try to do it yourself. Many of those ideas just don't work, and they leave you broker than you were. Here's some advice. Call our debt helpline. In a quick and free 5-minute conversation, our experts will listen to you and learn about how much credit card debt you have, what your goals are, and then show you the right solution to help you get out of credit card debt with one new simple, affordable payment. The credit card companies make available special programs to help if you're struggling. All it takes for you to finally get out of credit card debt is one quick, free phone call. So please call right now.
800-948-6817. 800-948-6817. 800-948-6817. That's 800-948-6817. Paid for by the Debt Helpline.
That's ridiculous.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Hey everyone, Dave Jackson here, ESPN rules analyst on ESPN Hockey, and you're listening to the Sports Circus.
Welcome back to the Sports Circus. I'm your ringmaster, Sal, live from Las Vegas in the AMP TV studio, AAMP television. Folks, make sure to check out thesportscircus.com for our upcoming guests, our prior guests, recorded shows, which can be found on Apple, Amazon, Audible, Spotify, Pandora, YouTube, iHeart, Stitcher, Deezer, plus a whole bunch of others. Also, make sure you check out the store tab at thesportscircus.com. Lots of great items, embroidered items with the Sports Circus logo on it, all made in these United States of America. Hats, hoodies, t-shirts, sweatpants, coats, coffee mugs, pillows, you name it, mouse pads, they're there. A shameless plug, of course, for the Sports Circus. Check that out, folks. All right, welcome back to everybody. You know who you are, TV, radio. Continuing our discussion on the AFL and the NFL. And last I had said the NFL owners had a little bit less money than the AFL because the AFL and Hunt went out and found some really, really rich owners, and they could spend a hell of a lot more money. Now, think about this. The owners in both leagues also, despite the fact that there was a little bit of parity in players because it was getting better, but also there was a gap in wealth, there was a bigger problem, and that was the reserve clause written in the standard players' contracts of both leagues. They were really scared that they wouldn't survive some kind of a legal challenge. So those fears ultimately were well-founded. And the league merged, of course, the merger in football was finalized. And in the same light, the World Hockey Association would successfully challenge the National Hockey League in the same way with that reserve clause in court. So the National Football League teams had long adhered to the practice of drafting for and retaining NFL rights to players who signed with other leagues. This policy ensured, for example, that if a Canadian Football League player developed into a star, only one particular NFL team would have the right to sign him. This ensured that NFL teams did not become embroiled in costly bidding wars for top free agents. And of course, once the American Football League commenced operations, all bets were off. NFL teams extended this policy so they couldn't mess around the AFL anymore. It's like, okay, now we know we've got something. The NFL promptly reciprocated the arrangement, so their players technically couldn't get poached either. This arrangement soon evolved into a gentleman's agreement between the two leagues. That's a really important piece of the puzzle when you look at the grand scheme of things. I mean, look, at some point, you have to have some kind of semblance to good business, ethical business, and good faith business. And I think that's this gentleman's agreement that I just mentioned here. Nonetheless, that gentleman's agreement between the two U.S. leagues that extended even beyond the arrangement of the NFL observed with respect to the Canadian Football League specifically, once a player signed with a U.S. professional team, be it the AFL or NFL, teams in both U.S. leagues were expected to honor each other's players' contracts in their entirety, including the respective reserve clauses, and not sign players who were under contract with other teams in rival leagues. So there's a certain degree of integrity here. Now, this unwritten agreement was broken. Yes, it was broken in May of 1966 when the NFL's New York Football Giants signed place kicker Pete Gogolak, who had played out his option in 1965 with the AFL's Buffalo Bills. And the NFL's situation of that bet, or that, I would say it's a bet, the gentleman's agreement, kind of like a bet. Well, that agreement resulted in retaliation by the AFL. Oakland Raiders co-owner Al Davis took over as the AFL commissioner in 1966, and he stepped up the bidding war after that kicker transferred, signing notable NFL players including John Brody, Mike Ditka, and Roman Gabriel to contracts with AFL teams. Both leagues spent about $7 million signing their 1966 draft picks. That's a lot of money. So then we have the merger. Now, the NFL initiated discussions for a merger between the two leagues through a back channel. Tex Schramm, the general manager of the Dallas Cowboys at that time, since 1960, secretly contacted AFL owners led by Lamar Hunt of Kansas City and asked if they were interested in a merger. And the talks were conducted without the knowledge of Al Davis, the new AFL commissioner. On the evening of June 8, 1966, the collaborators announced a merger agreement in New York. Under the agreement, the two leagues would combine to form an expanded league with 24 teams, to increase to 26 teams by 1969, 28 by 1970, or soon thereafter. In any other case, the Atlanta Falcons, Miami Dolphins were already established and set to start play for the 1966 season before the merger was announced in June. And the leagues would add the New Orleans Saints in 1967 and the Cincinnati Bengals in 1968 prior to the merger. Also, all existing franchises would be retained and none would be moved outside of their metro areas. And the agreement stipulated that no new franchises were to be placed by either league within the media markets of the other. So the Oakland Raiders and New York Jets would pay indemnities to the San Francisco 49ers and New York Giants, respectively. Also, both leagues would hold a common draft of college players, effectively ending the bidding wars that I mentioned previously. And the leagues would maintain separate regular season schedules through 1969. However, interleague preseason play would commence in 1967. And of course, the leagues agreed to play an annual AFL-NFL World Championship game, matching the champions of each league beginning in 1967. And the games, of course, was eventually known as the Super Bowl, in case you didn't know that. Unlike the championship games of the leagues, which were always hosted by one of the participating teams, the interleague champion game would be held at a neutral stadium. And of course, both leagues would officially merge in 1970 to form one league with two conferences. The merged league would be known, of course, as the National Football League, and the league agreed to adopt unified rules by 1970 of the latest itself. And the leagues also agreed not to unilaterally adapt new rules that deviated from the established rules of the profession American Football Conference or the American Football League in the interim, although the AFL was permitted to retain pre-existing rule variations, such as two-point conversions, for the remainder of its existence. Now, the history and records of the AFL would be incorporated into older league. There's a problem. That leads us to our upcoming discussion. In essence, for all relevant purposes, the AFL franchises were to be regarded by the NFL as if they had joined the league, the older league, in whatever seasons they commenced play in the AFL. Now, the AFL would abolish the office of the AFL commissioner immediately, being Al Davis, and recognize the NFL commissioner as the overall chief executive for professional football. And this arrangement, which was in keeping with a provision of the NFL's constitution dating back to 1941, when a title of commissioner was actually introduced in football in the first place, that sought to invest the NFL's chief executive with a similar level of authority to that exercised by the commissioner of baseball, for example. Formally ended the AFL's 6-year run as an independent league, and NFL Films would start recording the games of the footage for the AFL starting in 1968 under a newly established AFL Films division. And the 2 seasons wait was agreed to and insisted on the NFL Films founder, Eb Sebel, who contended he needed adequate time to hire and train additional personnel. Thus, in practice, the AFL Films crew were simply regular NFL Films crews, although they were just issued distinctive jackets with AFL contest and the logos on them. So, Following the agreement, the American Football League owners created the office of the AFL president with a mandate to administer the league's day-to-day business in a semi-autonomous manner, which, like the ways that constituted the leagues of Major League Baseball, operated at the time with the American League and the National League. And the owners had hoped that Davis would continue to serve that role, but Davis flatly refused to consider serving as a subordinate to Pete Rozelle. After Davis resigned as the AFL commissioner, July 25, 1966, Milt Woodard, who was assistant commissioner under the original commissioner Joe Foss, and Davis was appointed to serve that position. So, although Pete Rozelle had not initiated the merger negotiated, he quickly endorsed the agreement. In addition to remaining post as an NFL commissioner, Rozelle was duly appointed chief executive of the AFL the day after Davis actually resigned, and would hold the post throughout the completion of the merger. In practice, the media often simply referred to Rozelle as the commissioner, period. And so the pre-existing office NFL president continued effectively unchanged. So now he is really the top dog. And that's how you got to look at this. And then occupied by Cleveland Browns owner Art Modell. And the NFL presidency was both before and after the merger, essentially an honorary title. In practice, Rozelle generally respected Woodard's mandate. And the most notorious example of Rozelle's directly intervening in NFL affairs came prior to 1969 when he forced the Super Bowl III winning quarterback Joe Namath to divest his stake in a New York nightclub with alleged ties to gambling and organized crime. Well, as we know, the stories go on and on and on, but I will tell you this much. A lot of this has long-term effects. You think of these conditions of the mergers and by the 89th Congress. So now Congress gets involved. They're talking about antitrust sanctions and all this other nonsense. Pete Rozelle promised that if a merger was allowed, that no existing professional football franchise of either league would be moved from any city. Well, that obviously didn't work. And the combined leagues would eventually expand to 28, which expanded far beyond that. Seating of 50,000 or less was declared inadequate, which probably is the case at this point. Anyway, we're going to finish this discussion up in the next segment. Lots more to come here on the Sports Circus. Don't go anywhere.
Can your IRA stand up to the next financial crisis that our top economists are saying is at our doorsteps? By allocating a percentage of your IRA into physical gold and silver with a tax-free rollover, you can diversify and safeguard your holdings from turbulent markets and economic downturns by putting your IRA back on the gold standard. Find out how to safeguard your assets with a tax-free rollover with a Genesis Gold IRA. The only IRA that can hold physical precious metals. Call now for your free gold and silver report. Protect your IRA today with one simple phone call and learn how to qualify for up to $10,000 in free silver. Call Genesis Gold Group, empowering faith-driven stewardship. 800-932-5517. 800-932-5517. 800-932-5517. That's 800-932-5517.
If you served in the Marine Corps, by now you know about the contaminated water problem at Camp Lejeune. If you were stationed or worked at Camp Lejeune from 1953 to 1987, you probably have a lot of questions. We have some answers. You could be entitled to compensation. Billions of dollars are being allocated to pay for damages to anyone stationed at Camp Lejeune during that time. Unfortunately, it appears that officials may have known the contaminated water problem existed and did little to protect their men. The Semper Fi code was not honored. If you or someone in your family has developed a serious illness, including various forms of cancer, call this Camp Lejeune legal support line right now. You can't turn back the clock and change what happened, but you can certainly call right now and learn your rights as a Marine. Here's the number.
Call 800-335-7196. 800-335-7196. That's 800-335-7196.
Do a search on how to get out of credit card debt, and you'll find everything from crazy promises to ways you can try to do it yourself. Many of those ideas just don't work, and they leave you broker than you were. Here's some advice. Call our debt helpline. In a quick and free 5-minute conversation, our experts will listen to you and learn about how much credit card debt you have, what your goals are, and then show you the right solution to help you get out of credit card debt with one new simple, affordable payment. The credit card companies make available special programs to help if you're struggling. All it takes for you to finally get out of credit card debt is one quick, free phone call. So please call right now.
800-948-6817. 800-948-6817. 800-948-6817. That's 800-948-6817. Paid for by the Debt Helpline.
Hey everybody, this is Brian Urlacher. Welcome back to the Sports Circus.
Welcome back to the Sports Circus. I'm your ringmaster, Sal, live from Las Vegas in the AMP TV studio, AAMP Television. Folks, thanks for joining us today on all of our network affiliates, our independents as well. And listen, this is an interesting show on history of football that nobody really talks about. So hopefully you'll have a chance to play this one over again. In case you missed any parts of it, make sure you go to thesportscircus.com and click on all of our affiliates, or better yet, our streaming affiliates, that is, whether it's Apple, Amazon, Audible, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, Deezer, whatnot, and go to the state and listen to the full episode if you missed any part of it. This is a really interesting show with a lot of good information, and we've gotten a lot of messages that have come across while we're in the middle of doing this show, and people are asking questions. They're saying, well, can you expand on this? No, actually, I can't expand on it right now because I'm on a roll and I got to make sure I get through this content. But you can email me at info@thesportscircus.com. That's info@thesportscircus.com, and I can answer your questions that way. And that's probably the best way I could do it. Maybe some of them I'll bring in on air. Okay, folks, back to this NFL, AFL thing. Now, of course, Congress had to intervene in 1970 to allow this merger to actually happen between the two leagues because there was an antitrust situation where people were complaining about it. And they're saying, well, you know, we don't like the idea of the possibility of just one league. Maybe it's a monopolization or it's unfair business practices or something to that effect. And so that all deals with the Sherman Act. Go back to the law library and you can read about the Sherman Act and antitrust and whatnot, because that is the original piece of legislation when it comes to antitrust violations. And so nonetheless, the 89th Congress did convene in this, and, well, in October of 1970, Congress passed the new law to permit the merger to proceed. So, at that point, 3 NFL teams, the Colts, the Browns, and the Steelers, that would be the Baltimore Colts, not the Indianapolis Colts, folks, they moved, agreed to join 10 NFL teams to form the American Football Conference. And so the other 13 teams, the NFL teams, the Atlanta Falcons, the Chicago Bears, Dallas Cowboys, Detroit Lions, Green Bay Packers, LA Rams, Minnesota Vikings, New Orleans Saints, New York Giants, Philadelphia Eagles, St. Louis Cardinals, San Francisco 49ers, and Washington Redskins became part of the National Football Conference. So there we have the split of the two conferences, AFC, NFC. Now, of course, although the AFC teams quickly decided on a divisional alignment along mostly geographical lines, the 13 NFC owners had trouble deciding which teams would play in what divisions. The 49ers and Rams, both in California, were guaranteed to be in the same division as the only NFC teams west of the Rocky Mountains. And of course, one early proposal would have put them with teams in the Northeast, like the Giants and the Eagles and the Redskins, reminiscent of the Western Conference's Coastal Division, which had put LA and San Francisco together with Baltimore, Atlanta as well, 1967, 1969. So the final proposals were as follows. Plan 1 had in the East, the Giants, the Eagles, Redskins, Falcons, and Vikings. Central, Bears, Packers, Lions, and Saints. In the West, LA, San Francisco, Dallas, and St. Louis. Plan 2 was a little different. Plan 3, different. Now, eventually, Plan 5 had the Giants, Eagles, Redskins, Lions, Vikings. In the East, the Central had Bears, Packers, Cowboys, Cardinals in the Central, which actually makes a little bit of sense geographically. And the West had LA, San Francisco, Atlanta, and New Orleans, which makes no sense whatsoever. But those combinations were written up on slips of paper, sealed into envelopes, and put into a fishbowl. Of course, others say a flower vase. Doesn't really matter if you know what I mean. But the other official alignment, Plan 3, was pulled out by Roselle's secretary, which had the Giants, Eagles, Redskins, Cowboys, and Cardinals in the East, the Packers, Bears, Lions, and Vikings in the Central, and the Rams, 49ers, Atlanta, and New Orleans in the West. Imagine that. How could New Orleans and Atlanta be in the West? Whatever the case. So that was the one pulled out. And of the 5 plans considered, the one that was put into effect was the only one which had Minnesota remaining in the Central and Dallas playing in the East. So meanwhile, all 3 of the major conferences or major television networks signed contracts to televise these games, ensuring the combined league stability. Of CBS agreed to broadcast all games where the NFC teams were on the road, and NBC would cover all the AFC teams, and ABC to do the Monday Night Football games. So that's kind of how that all played out. And, of course, we have the aftermath, and we all know what happened with the aftermath, right? So we have Super Bowls, whatnot. But now many observers believe that the NFL got the better end of the bargain as the Oakland Raiders and Al Davis and the New York Jets owner Sonny Werblin resisted the indemnity payments. So longtime sports writer Jerry McGee from the San Diego Union-Tribune wrote, quote, Al Davis taking over as commissioner was the strongest thing the AFL ever did. He thought the AFL-NFL merger was a detriment to the AFL. And of course, however, close quote, however, other observers consider the scenarios far-fetched. And when you look at this, you say, well, all right, in large part because, however, the other observers considered that far-fetched because the NFL had a richer television contract. And of course, the merger in large part because of exclusivity in such leading population centers as LA, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Atlanta and Dallas were all included, rapidly increasing in population as well. And so those were other situations where you had certain teams in there, certain cities in there that were growing populations. They were going to make more money. Now, despite AFL and their wins in Super Bowl 3 and 4, the old guard of the NFL was still widely expected to dominate as the teams or the leagues merged. And in fact, each of the first 29 games on the new Monday Night Football featured at least one team from the old guard NFL, with the first nationally televised primetime game between the 2 former AFL teams being Oakland and Houston back on October 9th of 1972. And the merger paved the way for a new era, as we know, from the XFL, WFL, USFL, UFL, AAF, XFL, etc., so forth, the rebirth. And it's just gotten crazier. So now also, remember, the league expanded in Tampa Bay and also in Seattle in 1976, even though there was a statement that the leagues could not expand. So with all that said, the reason we covered that is because now the NFL's official records to finally incorporate the All-America Football Conference from way back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, whatnot, and that is a really significant thing. So let's go back. The NFL record books is about to be rewritten, and Paul Brown, perhaps the most influential coach in modern football history, will be the biggest winner. For 65 years, the exploits of those who played and coached in a long-defunct professional football league that was an early rival to the NFL had been mostly ignored, lost in the explosion of interest in statistics and the merger of the AFL and NFL. So how about this? Now the All-America Football League is actually being enacted in the record books. So 2 decades before the vaunted merger of the 69 that I mentioned, be it the AFL and NFL, well, remember, the All-America Football Conference, an earlier competitor of the NFL, went out of business at the end of 1949. 3 of its teams, the Cleveland Browns, San Francisco 49ers, and the original Baltimore Colts, joined the NFL for the start of the 1950 season. So there is a tie between the two. And a fourth team, the New York Yanks, was essentially a spinoff of some players that had been part of the AAFC, the All-American Football, and, of course, the New York Yankees. So the rest of the teams folded. Despite those links with the NFL, all the records for every team and players of the 4 years the AAFC existed disappeared unacknowledged in the NFL's record books. Until now! Now, included in the competition committee for the reports of the NFL owners in advance of the annual league meeting, that was notice that the statistics from the AAFC players, coaches, teams will finally be incorporated into the NFL's record books, and that is a really big thing, just as the AFL records were incorporated in NFL's records as well. So this actually was officially approved in Palm Beach, Florida at the meetings. Now, the AAFC was no minor league. 17 men who coached or played in the AAFC are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, including Paul Brown and players like Otto Graham, the great Otto Graham, Y.A. Tittle, and Marion Motley. No one seems to know why the records did not carry over to the NFL at the time of the AAFC's demise, although a long ago note in the NFL's record and fact book stated that the official score sheets were not available for the AAFC. I wonder why that is. I mean, no note, though, it has appeared since the 1980s. Now, a move to include the AAFC statistics picked up steam back in 2019 when the NFL celebrated that 100th year anniversary. They said, you know what? Hey, listen, these guys were playing back in the day, 1949, the AFC published statistical records. Why don't we include them? And that's exactly what they did. Now think about it. The most significant adjustment will be Brown's coaching record. In 2024, the NFL record and fact book, Brown is credited with 21 seasons, 166 regular wins, 4 postseason wins for a career of 170 total, and 3 championships. But Brown coached the Cleveland Browns to the championship in every one of the AAFC's 4 seasons. He won 47 regular season games in the AAFC and 5 additional postseason games. His career totals then should be 222 wins, 7 overall championships, 222 victories will vault him up past in the all-time wins list. In 2024, the NFL records and facts book, Browns was in 21st place. Not anymore. With the AFC's adjustment, he will be in 7th place, just behind Curly Lambeau, who had 229 overall wins, and just ahead of Chuck Noll with 209, giving Brown outsized influence on coaching, and he is credited with, among other things, beginning the practice of using film analysis to grade players and calling plays from the sidelines. It's hard to imagine anything that's wrong with this number. I mean, folks, that's really good information. Now, among other changes, Marion Motley will now be 4th on the list of highest career rushing average with a 5.7 yards per carry. That's crazy. Ahead of Michael Vick, Randall Cunningham, Lamar Jackson, and the San Francisco 49ers of 1948 amassed 3,663 yards, which puts them in first place all time over the 2019 Ravens, who had 3,296 rushing yards. The 1948 49ers averaged 6.1 yards per run in 1948, which will also be put them in first place just ahead of the 2024 Ravens, who averaged 5.8 yards per carry. That's pretty exciting stuff. So it took us a while to get here, folks. A really interesting discussion on the AFC, or the AFL and the NFL and the AAFC. Listen, folks, this is good stuff. Make sure you go back and replay this episode. Until then, we'll see you in about 23 hours right here on your favorite station. So long, everyone.
Can your IRA stand up to the next financial crisis that our top economists are saying is at our doorsteps? By allocating a percentage of your IRA into physical gold and silver with a tax-free rollover, you can diversify and safeguard your holdings from turbulent markets and economic downturns by putting your IRA back on the gold standard. Find out how to safeguard your assets with a tax-free rollover with a Genesis Gold IRA, the only IRA that can hold physical precious metals. Call now for your free gold and silver report. Protect your IRA today with one simple phone call and learn how to qualify for up to $10,000 in free silver. Call Genesis Gold Group, empowering faith-driven stewardship. 800-932-5517. 800-932-5517. 800-932-5517. That's 800-932-5517.
I'm your ringmaster Sal of the Sports Circus. Join me and Hall of Fame world champion and all-star celebrity guest for Chaos and Controversy here on Libsyn and all podcast platforms. Also, thesportscircus.com. Remember, folks, it's a circus and we prove it every day.